Greetings, Internet. Mike and Andy here from the frigid headquarters of the Vox podcast. Andy's actually in California, but I am here in the great state of Ohio, and it is frigid, Andy. It is the high temperature today is 29. So I finally met a temperature that my flip-flops. Although I wore them out to take Hannah to school this morning, I was in shorts, flip-flops, and a sweatshirt. and I will say, for the first time in a long time, my feet were cold.
Yeah.
Yep, I know. So it's wearing me down. Andy. It's supposed to be fall. Feels like winter. Not acceptable. Andy, I thought, you did this really nice thing for me. And I remember it specifically because it so rarely happens, but you set up this Google Doc form that automatically populates when people email in questions to the Vox podcast.
Correct.
You remember that?
Oh yeah.
And you did that in August.
Yes.
And I checked it for the first time about 3 days ago. We're recording in November. And I just forgot. I forgot that you had done that. Yeah. And you put it on Chrome. And so I rarely use Chrome, blah, blah, blah. So to say we're a bit behind on our questions is an understatement. So we thought we'd do another Q&A episode to just try to at least symbolically attempt to catch up to what we've got. So we're going to keep this one short and sweet. We are so grateful for the questions you give us. I will email you back that we answered your question. Or at least discussed your question. I don't know how well we'll answer it. And again, we don't consider ourselves, especially Andy, the Bible answer men or anything, but we do think it's super important to make it safe to ask questions. So any time we can engage with these things, we don't particularly think we're all that smart. It's more just the kind of environment that I didn't grow up in, and many of us did not grow up in, where it was okay to ask really hard questions. So we're not, so disclaimers aside, here's number one. Hi, Mike and Andy. Thank you for what you guys do. You're welcome. I find it very helpful. I'm so glad. Question time. Both Psalm 131 and Jeremiah 1 say that God formed us in the womb. Psalm 131 is the Psalm of David, where he talks about knowing us. He knows my thoughts before I arise. He knows my life story ahead of time. He's from the east and the west. It's this beautiful, beautiful reflection. In Jeremiah, it's reflecting in Jeremiah 1 about his call as a prophet, and said that the Lord anointed him in the womb. So both Psalm 139, Jeremiah 1 say that God forms us in the womb, which I've heard people use as an argument for birth defects being God's will. I personally don't believe that or align with a Calvinist theology, but I wanted to hear your takes on what the scriptures are saying. Does God literally form every child in the womb exactly how he wants them? Are these verses metaphors for how God knows us? Something else? Mike, I know you've spoken briefly about how people have told you that it was God's will that Seth would have Down syndrome, so I think it would be particularly interesting and powerful to hear your thoughts. Thanks. P.S. I also play with Phil Wickham, and I think hockey is all right. So, first of all, had I read that last part, I would not have included the question.
Hence why it was last. He knows how this show goes. Exactly.
So when both of us have children with Down syndrome, if you're a new listener, and we found out 3 months ahead of time that our Seth had Down syndrome. He either had trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome, or he had trisomy 18, which means his life would not be viable outside the womb. And in either instance, we were unprepared, and we were certainly very anxious, fearful, upset, sad. But one of my dear friends at the time said, "Hey, isn't it great to know that God trusts you with a kid like this? And it must be great comfort to know that God assigned, you a kid like this." And I'm like, No, actually, it's great comfort to know that God redeems, but that God did not create Seth with Down syndrome, nor would he have created Seth with trisomy 18. I don't think God's will is genetic abnormalities, hence the term abnormalities. I think God's will in Genesis 1 and 2 clearly is typical functioning, kind of normal human persons. However, what I think has happened, and I think this is well attested to in the scriptures, is that bloodlines have been polluted, sin and death have entered the world, disease is now a thing, DNA degrades. I think all of those things were not true prior to the entrance of sin and death in the world. And so we retain, of course, our image bearingness, but now suffer a whole array, anything from cancer to birth defects, because we now live in a fallen world. I do not think that God's will is, because the second question, which is, I didn't even realize this, the second question is about a little boy that died with trisomy 18. And so if you want to say that God literally formed that child to die, I see no redemptive purpose in that whatsoever. Or if people have said to me, hey, he'll really teach you. God will use him to teach you a lot of things, and I'm like, absolutely, but that's not why Seth's here. Seth's here because genetic abnormalities are part of human fallen DNA, and God obviously loves. We adore him. We wouldn't change him. We wouldn't trade him in. We love him exactly as it is. It's a fantastic question about whether or not he'll have Down syndrome in the new heavens and new earth. But I totally agree with you, young man, when you ask about these verses being used for theology that says that birth defects or holes in your heart when you're born or whatever, that those things are exactly what God did. Man, I refer you back to several podcasts about whether or not God causes evil, to just simply say absolutely not. Absolutely not. So when the psalmist talks about being woven together in the mother's womb, I think that is a beautiful poetic image for not only how well God knows us, but how intimately he is involved in human personhood. That the development of human persons, yes, is a natural process that he created and has blessed, but also that process over the course of 9 months, there is a weaving together. It is a beautiful sort of thing that God knows, and the picture is that God knows us that intimately. Even Jeremiah 1 says, before you were born, I formed you and I knew you. And so I don't think you can say, particularly in light of other texts that seem to say that not everything that happens on the earth is God's will. I don't think you can derive a theology that says that birth defects are God's will from two highly poetic instances that I think more convey the idea that we are intimately known from the insides out. And when you read Psalm 139, it's full of that sort of language. It's beautiful. It's about how intimately we're known. It's not a theology of childbirth. Now, the flip side of this, it comes to the discussion we've had on abortion, where I do think there's something sacred about what's happening in there, absolutely, and I think the fetus has a status before God of something more than just a clump of cells. And so I think there's something to when people use those arguments to say, yeah, there's something unique about what's happening in there. Absolutely. But what I don't think you can draw from that is that God intended and designs each kid the exact way he wants them to be. What do you think?
Yeah. What do I think? I think it's the opposite. You're wrong. No.
Perfect.
Perfect. No,
Perfect.
that's what I was thinking about at the end when you're talking about that, is that, like, what you said about, if God knew us and formed us prior to us actually entering the womb, I just had all these other ideas of just thinking how it's like, well, think about Jesus, how God would, know him as like the full spiritual son, and then having to enter into flesh. It's kind of like there's a full knowledge, and then that soul has to then become a vessel through the formation of that flesh, ultimately ending up as the humans and the people that we know.
And I think that's the view that's being represented here, that God has all these souls, and he designs bodies for them.
Yeah.
Because even some old Mormon theology, that rebellious angels were put into black bodies. Obviously they disavow that now, but that was back in the day. But the picture is they've got this whole collection of Down syndrome kids up in the heavens, and God is just looking for parents who'd be really good parents. And I'm like, where the heck do you get that idea? I mean, where does it even hint at something like that, No,
right. Yeah, it's rather like I'd see it as opposite. It's like, no, Sunflower has a perfected soul among God, and she came into this world and has to occupy this vessel, but the redemptive value here on earth, and both the eternal redemptive value of ultimately once she's in heaven, and I will know her in the fullness of her soul and the fullness of her ability to be known in that time. So I don't, it is a little tricky for me, only because it's like, well, why then? I don't know. I can't, I'm not going to answer anything. I think I'm still a little stuck on a little bit of that. Like, I'm not going to advocate, it was God's will that she is this way. But at the same time, I'm trying to get my head to separate. It's still the question is like, why would he? But if she was perfect before, why would she have to come to this earth in that form? Obviously, it's a sinful and fallen world. So.
But hold on. But what do you mean perfect before?
Well, no, the way that God was saying, like how I knew you and formed you before, like before you're even in the womb, and what it said in Jeremiah. So
No. But while you were in the womb.
Okay. So all right, I just said that wrong.
Well, no. I mean, like I said, I don't think there's enough warrant for the view that says she's some perfected soul somewhere, and she just gets stuck in a Down syndrome body because of bad luck.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there's enough for that either. Yeah, I agree with that. So
because if you say so to the first question, if you say yeah, it's God's will, then you have to answer the second question exactly the same way.
Right.
So here's the second question. My son died almost a year ago exactly. He was born on my birthday, August 23rd, and died 8 days later on August 31st. He was born with a fatal genetic disorder called trisomy 18. We got his diagnosis earlier in my pregnancy, and we spent it preparing for his death. I can't even imagine what that was like. We held him as he died, and I watched the life leave his eyes. Something like that stays with a person, etched into the walls of their heart. I've been trying to find material, books to help me navigate how God fits into this. The religious grief books I've tried to read all have the same tone of, I was so broken, but I never gave up on God, or I knew God would save me as long as I opened my heart to him. Well, I didn't once pray in the NICU. Not once. God created my son to die. That wasn't someone I wanted to talk to. And even though I didn't pray, I still walked out of the hospital on my own 2 feet. I still managed to take care of my older son. I worked through dark times in my marriage to keep it healthy. I grieve and my heart aches every day, but I'm not broken and selling crack on the corner because I haven't prayed to God. Where does God fit into this? I haven't found anything or any material that gives a realistic portrayal of grief. I want to be spiritually healthy and have a relationship with God, but right now I'm wondering why I need him at all.
Dang.
Right. So I had no idea those two questions would be juxtaposed.
Yeah.
But if you answer to the first one, he forms, he knits together, then you have to say, absolutely, question number 2 person, I'm sorry to say it, but yes, he created your child to die. And this was for his glory. This is to either teach you something or some way God will be glorified in the NICU or something.
Yeah.
Maybe through your witness of handling it. Maybe there's some bigger purpose to it. I mean, that's really what you've got to say.
Right.
Or you have to say, which is what, I think we just spent some time saying, is that, no, God did not create your son to die.
Yeah.
And so you can talk to him. Where is God in this? Well, God is weeping with you. I mean, this wasn't God's will. God's will wasn't for you to experience 9 months of joy. And it wasn't even full 9 months for you because you found out early in the pregnancy this was going to be the issue. So literally, this was not God torturing you. This was not God trying to give you some spiritual blessing, quote unquote, through devastating circumstances. God is with you. I don't know how to avoid cliches at this point. So if we were talking, over coffee or, not coffee for me, but if we were talking over some sort of beverage, I would be sitting there just saying, I'm so sorry. This wasn't your fault. This was not something that God was doing to teach you a lesson. This was not, you didn't do this. You're not responsible for this, but God isn't either. And that's the picture the Bible paints again and again is of a war zone of cosmic conflict, and that conflict spills over into the realm of human persons. We not only are subject to the conflict, but we are conflict, but we are also propagators of the conflict as well, right? Mm-hmm. We're naturally born into the kingdom of darkness and blah 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 blah. And so I think the scriptures paint a picture where, Jesus comes across a man born blind, and the disciples say to Jesus, well, who was born blind? This man or his parents? Who sinned? That's the better way to say this. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that this man was born blind? They thought at the time, of course, that any disability could be traced back to the sin of the family line somewhere, either the sin of the person or the sin of the person's parents. And Jesus says, neither. This happened so that God might display his work. Now, what Jesus is saying there is that God didn't do this so that God would work. No. It's that God will work in this and through this. Mm-hmm. And so, young lady, if we were sitting here talking, I would grieve with you. I would lament with you. I remember what we felt when this was even a possibility for our son. And the devastation and the finality of that diagnosis, I just can't even imagine the trauma you've been through. And I don't imagine that God's up there puzzled about why you wouldn't talk to him if you thought he was the author of this. I just want to open you up to the possibility that he did not create your son to die, and that he weeps with you, that he has shown you grace and strengthened your spirit regardless of whether or not you have prayed, and so that you have been able to walk a year in this grief. I would encourage you to open your heart to God, that ask him to show you his heart for you, and his heart for your son, because quite frankly, you can take my word for it, or I think it'd be far more powerful if you experienced it from God himself. So I think God is with you. I think God is for you. I think God blesses you, and can bring beauty out of the ashes of this. But man, I don't think God is the author of it. I mean, we say this all the time. I think the scriptures teach that God is good, that evil is evil, and that God will bring good out of evil, but he is never the author of it. Yeah. He does not need evil to accomplish his plans in the world. And so I'm so sorry. I think I would, if we were sitting here talking, I would recommend you find someone you can process this with, the God piece specifically, because I just think that the view of him that has him as the author of something like this, no wonder you haven't prayed. Yeah. I mean, I'd have those same issues too if you believe that God just did this to you. Anything you want to add, Andy Bear?
No.
To accept disagreement?
No, I don't disagree with that at all. So, yeah, no, I'm right. No, and I'm hearing that correctly now. Before I heard it a little strange, and that's why it kind of threw me off. But nope, gotcha on that one. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's so much more to say, and again, I mean, part of this is why we do other podcasts on extended conversations on some of these topics, because we can refer back to them. So if you've listened to us for a while and missed those episodes, maybe that'd be good for further discussion. Or email us back, and we'd love to hear more about how you're doing. Hi, Mike and Andy. I so appreciate your podcast and you, Mike, as a teacher. I have been following Jesus my whole life, but have learned so much about the original purpose and context of the Bible, and as a result, about God from you guys. I do have a question on this issue. You have talked a lot, both in this podcast and on the Vox Community podcast, about the need to study the original context, background, and purpose of the Scripture as you read it. I agree that this is important, that there is so much that we can learn by doing this, and that this is so necessary to pull us away from the danger of interpreting Scripture with, quote, Western eyes, which is the name of a book I've recommended before. However, I recently heard someone say that the Bible is for everyone, meaning that anyone can understand it, no matter what their background, education level, access to good teaching, etc. What do you say to this? I agree with your view about the need to study the original context, but what about the person maybe in a third world country with no education, no ability to do this kind of study? Would God really make his word to be something that you have to have an education and access to study materials to understand? What a phenomenal question. In fact, this is so funny. So we're trying to get connected in Columbus. We went to a small group a couple of weeks ago, and the leader of the small group asked me to teach a little bit on hell. And so I taught it, and this was the objection. It was like, listen, you can go into Greek, you can go into whatever, but listen, man, when I read it in English, this is what it says. And I'm like, okay. So this is kind of even a relevant question for us, because then we went into exactly this discussion in light of that question. So let me briefly answer the question and then maybe explain a little bit. First, I think the Scripture, the main message of the Bible, is clear and open to anyone, regardless of education level. Absolutely. I mean, anyone, even a child, can understand, for God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life, right? Mm-hmm. It's pretty clear. You can, the Good Samaritan, a lot of Jesus's teaching is just very straightforward. A lot of it is parabolic, and sometimes, needs a bit of interpreting. But my point is that anybody could pick up the Bible, read it, and benefit. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This was a doctrine called the perspicuity of the Scriptures. That anyone could read it, right? One of the huge things of the Reformation was getting the Bible in the hands of common, ordinary folks. Mm-hmm. And so absolutely. And God's Spirit, superintends, over us and illuminates the Scriptures, and no question about that. While at the same time, however, you can spend your whole life studying the Scriptures and never reach the bottom. Yeah. And so it's kind of like God himself. Is God obvious? Well, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, you watch the world through the eyes of a child, and the amazement of snow, the power of thunder, the beauty of rain, the sound of wind. I mean, you're just kind of like, oh man, something's behind all this, right? It's kind of obvious. But on the other hand, you realize there are all of these minute discussions that go, burrow down into the bedrock of human experience of the world and human experience of human experience. And you can have all these deep conversations about the nature of the soul and consciousness and whatever, about whether or not God exists. So is God's existence obvious? Well, yes and no. Is the Bible clear? Well, yes and no. I mean, Peter, at the end of, I think it's 1 Peter, talks about how some of Paul's teaching is actually difficult to understand, and because of that, some people have twisted it and distorted it. So even in the very clear Bible, you have Peter saying that some of Paul's teaching is really, really difficult. Yeah. So on the one hand, think about who made up the early church, right? It wasn't scholars. It wasn't the best, the brightest, and the beautiful. It was the common person. It was slaves. It was laborers. It was peasants. But on the other hand, Like some of the Bible is written in incredibly literate Greek. Some of it's written in really rough Greek, maybe translated from another language, in the meantime. Jesus is wonderfully clear in some places, and he's really obscure in some other places. So my point is, I don't think you have to choose. I just think to whom much is given, much is expected. And for those of us who have, thanks to the community of scholars in the Western world and in the Eastern world, we have access to documents, linguistic analysis, cultural background that for 2,000 years people haven't had,
right.
and that allow us to dive deep into some of these things, but. Never should the Bible be the province of the scholars or the teachers, right? Because so the answer is you hold both in tension. On the one hand, the main message of the Bible is absolutely clear. On the other, there are some doctrinal things that are very, very confusing that diving deep into them makes, it's like going to Israel. When my wife and I went to Israel, the analogy we used was like you go from seeing the words in black and white to now seeing color, right? You don't have to go to Israel to understand the Bible, but when you go to Israel, you understand the Bible a lot better. It's the same way with all this background. And one of the reasons why we have, 30,000 denominations, and one of the reasons why we have all of the fights that we have is because there are folks in the church that are very anti-scholarship, folks in the church that are almost exclusively aimed towards scholarship. And there's no real agreement on the role that scholarship should play in the church. And so, my view is if you pick up an English Bible, you've already benefited from the work of untold scholars who made theological and interpretive decisions before you even opened the pages.
Yeah.
And so that's why, my point, I've overmade it dramatically because I have that spiritual gift. My point, of course, is I don't think it's one or the other. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that. And I think what I'm hearing too is, to me, it also feels like there's something kind of behind that question as well, because I think for whatever reason, as followers and people in churches, we're left with this decision to judge the fruit of those who's teaching, and so it's kind of,
ooh, that's good.
So it's like you kind of have to look at, if you're in some position where you're trying to make a decision, it's important to take in a lot of context. So yeah, if you're in a third world country and you're meeting folks who are hearing the Bible for the first time, you're not going to start,
Right.
in Revelation, and so it's like, it's kind of realizing that there's a digestive process in which we kind of receive that information so that it can actually be clear and make sense for a lot of us. And I think here in the Western world, if someone's going to claim to be a scholar or a teacher or take the responsibility of getting on a stage and speaking to thousands of people, you're going to look at them and be like, you can't afford to be ignorant and lazy of all the information that's available so that you can understand what you're teaching best. So that's where it's like, because you have access to all of this, you should have a little wider depth into it.
Yeah, because it's easy just to open it up and say, okay, sweet, what's this verse mean to me?
Right.
And there's this pietistic tradition in evangelical circles of quiet time where you do that. You just open the Bible, you say, what's this verse mean to me? And you go. And there are some great upsides to that approach. We just want to make people aware of the downsides of the approach too.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm getting at too, is that if you're gonna, it kind of comes down to what do you intend to do with the text. If you're learning from it and something good is taking place in your spirit and your heart in it, okay. Now how you work that out and how you apply that around you and your environment, that's where things can start getting called into question if it actually becomes harmful to others, and all of a sudden like, wait, this doesn't look like gospel now. So right. That's kind of, I think, what we're trying to say here. If someone's going to take a step forward though and say, well, I'm going to now apply this publicly, I'm going to teach it or raise others in it, I think then it does demand on someone to be like, okay, I need to read this thing a lot. So I'm just not trying to open it and benefit. I'm actually trying to understand what more is here, and that's going to take you on then a road of discovery. So I think that's what it calls you to, and I think this day and age, if you're in the Western world, you have that opportunity pretty easily. So
right, yeah, exactly.
That's
exactly.
That's my thought on
so
that.
That's a great question, and please follow up if because I hope our answer was clear and unclear.
Yeah.
I think we were successful. All right. Seth Erie is going to make an appearance in 10 minutes as he gets off the bus. So I got 10 minutes to answer one last question.
All right.
And then we'll get Sethy on, maybe for a little blessing at the end. Guys, thank you so much for listening and for trusting us with this stuff. Hi, Mike. I just listened to your podcast on Charlottesville and heard a little bit about the Nashville statement at Vox on Sunday. Your comments about how, as Christians, we need to respond to the race issue by repenting for ourselves and our country and move forward by loving not only those of other races, but by loving white supremacists, our enemy, totally makes sense. I'm having a hard time feeling the same way and seeing the sin as equal towards the LGBT community. I've had friends that are gay and can love them, but as you were talking about the Nashville statement on Sunday, I was sitting behind a gay couple and was having such a hard time not judging them and wondering how can they be Christians and be gay. I'm afraid I'm probably not the only Christian who feels this way. True. I would love to hear your thoughts on why you think this community is so stigmatized and why it is more difficult to love and accept them than it is to recognize that white supremacists need to be loved. This is a group I want to learn to love the way Jesus does, but I don't want to move into total acceptance of something that I've always been taught was wrong in God's eyes. Thank you so much for wisdom and discernment. In the midst of all the craziness going on in our country, I'm grateful for a voice I can trust is listening to Jesus on how to respond. Well, I hope
10 minutes.
I hope we're listening to Jesus. Well, no, I mean, what a wonderful question. So first of all, this happened at our church. So here's someone. This is exactly what we want to have happen. So here's somebody who's been taught that that homosexuality is a sin, and they're sitting behind a couple of gay folks at church, and they're provoked into these big questions by simply sitting there. And they're willing to admit. So I love that you even admit this, that you're having a hard time not judging them in ways that are different than judging white supremacists and recognizing the need to love them. You're actually having a harder time doing that with the gay community. And so first of all, the fact that you're that honest is beautiful. Thank you for being so honest. Number two, I do think a lot of people feel that way. But this is exactly the kind of community we've hoped to create. A community where non-affirming people and affirming people sit together and work out how to live together. So do I think your loving them has to mean that you approve of their behavior? And the answer, of course, is no, although, and we've spent times on what love means, right? In the same way that you would love a white supremacist but not approve of their behavior, you could love members of the gay community without approving of their behavior. The counter, of course, will be that I've heard from members of the gay community is that, well, if you don't love this part of me, how can you love me? Because this is central to who I am and what I am. And we can go down that rabbit hole in a bit. The bigger question for me is why would you have in a congregation people on both sides of this issue? And the answer is, of course, because that's what that's the beauty of what Jesus did when he was here the first time. It's the beauty of what Jesus does now, that he does confront us with our self-righteousness. He does confront us with our condemning judgment of other people. So the fact that you're wrestling with this, I think, is a beautiful and wonderful thing, and I love your honesty. Makes sense so far, Andy Bear?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So why are they still so stigmatized, and why is it more difficult to love and accept them than it is to recognize the white supremacists need to be loved? All right. Well, here's how I can't answer this outside of my own experience. So let me start rambling, and Andy, redirect as we go. For me, I have struggled with sexual sin my whole life. In various ways and in various degrees, according to the same scriptures that we would point to condemn, the actions of gay sexuality. And again, I'm not taking sides on this. I'm just saying, as I've walked this journey, the first thing I've realized is that I'm always the biggest sinner in the room. We've talked a lot about this. When Jesus commands us to not judge, he uses an image of a log and a speck of dust. And he says, if you're going to correct your brother or sister, make sure to remove the log in your own eye before you dare remove the speck in someone else's eye. So I'm to consider my sinfulness as a log. So it's that big, and I see that first before I notice the speck in other people's eyes. So as a practical matter, because I'm in touch with my own brokenness in this area, I can sit and look at somebody else who's broken in this area differently than me, but nevertheless broken. And again, I'm assuming for the sake of this discussion that the scriptures are clearly teaching this is wrong. That those same scriptures teach me that my sin, my sexual sin is a log, their sexual sin is a speck. So I'm literally the biggest sinner in the room. So what I would be doing in that situation is flooding my mind with repentance and confession of all the ways I've fallen myself short of God's covenantal ideal of sexuality, if you hold the traditional view. Make sense?
Yeah.
So that's step towards non-judgment number one. That's different for me for white supremacy, because white supremacy, I don't think I've ever held that consciously. I have to actually dig to white privilege a little bit before I get in touch with that. With sexuality, I can get in touch pretty quickly with where my own brokenness is. And so I'm sitting there reflecting on my own brokenness, the need for grace, the welcome I feel at the table, and that translates for me automatically in not wanting to restrict that welcome to anybody else. I then also process about how it is that I've grown over the course of my lifetime, what the prequels were in my life, that some of which led to the struggles, some of which I've done myself, and realized that if you just looked at my snapshots at certain periods of my life, you'd come to vastly different conclusions about my spirituality than you would if you looked at the whole picture.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes, totally.
And then the third thing I would say is that I want you to know that what you're wrestling with here is exactly what we hope people are wrestling with. It's easy to talk about the gay, quote, issue in a vacuum, but when you're sitting next to real life people who are claiming to be followers of Jesus, who say they love Jesus and have been saved and rescued by Jesus, and who are gay on top of all of that, it's a much different conversation when there are flesh and blood people in the room. Why are you yawning, Andy?
Yeah, I'd been up so early. My kids, man.
What?
I need another
And you're
cup of
wearing a
coffee.
shirt, and you're wearing a shirt that says "sleepless,"
Yes,
which
that's right.
is very fitting, evidently.
Thank you.
So I'm used to people yawning when I'm talking, Andy, but not from you.
Yeah.
You've at least always pretended to be interested.
Yeah, well, we have a time difference now, though, so we're in different scenarios. So
I know, but I should be the one tired. It's 2:42 here. It's 11:42 there. You should be like
yeah. What time did you wake up?
I woke up at went to bed around 1, got up at 7. How about you?
I went to bed at 12 and I woke up at like 5:36.
Why you got to be trumping me like that?
I'm just saying. By what, a half hour? Oh man, I know, it's not even lunchtime. I just need that. I need another food kick. I need another cup of coffee. I just
Okay.
Anyways.
Okay.
Yep.
So part of the stigma, when you ask why is that community still stigmatized, part of the deal has been because that's the most consistent sin we've preached against for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't divorce. It wasn't premarital sex. Unless you were consistent, and some communities totally were, but a lot of communities totally were not. Mm-hmm. And so they created this double standard where homosexuality, that sin issue was different than all the other sin issues.
Yeah.
It was unnatural, it was an abomination, it was all these words attached to it. And so, of course, it became stigmatized because it wasn't what the church was struggling with, right? But as it turned out, no, it was struggling with that. Right. And so there's always this thing, the people that we have have the hardest time loving, it's usually because there's something in us that we have a hard time loving in us too. There's some sort of, so for me, I have a hard time loving judgmental people. Well, as it turns out, I can be quite judgmental towards those people. And so here I am. What's sparking me when I'm around judgmental people is the same tendency I have to judge it towards other people. And I'm not saying that you're offended by sexual sin because you have sexual sin. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I always ask that question. If something's sparking my judgment mechanism, I always want to turn inward and go, okay, so what have I done? What have I engaged in? What have I contributed to? How have I done this so that I'm aware of it, I'm sensitive to it, I'm offended by it, like it isn't just happening in a vacuum. There's something in me too that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And then I think people would say that the gay community is stigmatized in the church. I think some would say, I don't know that I agree with this. I don't know enough to know. That they're reacting always to what they perceive to be as an agenda that's not just forcing tolerance but acceptance.
Yeah.
That unless you affirm in all aspects gay identity, then you really can't love somebody who's gay, or you're doing harm to somebody who's gay or whatever.
Right.
And I think certainly at times that's true, but at other times I don't imagine it has to be true.
Right.
So I don't know, man. There's like a whole bunch of thoughts. I feel like these are the kinds of questions that the church should provoke.
Yeah, absolutely.
How come that group gets in here too? Right? And Jesus tells this beautiful parable about day laborers that work 1 hour and they get paid the same amount of day laborers that have worked all day.
Right.
And the laborers are offended. The ones that started early are totally offended. Like, how can they only worked an hour? How come? And then the owner says this beautiful thing. He's like, well, didn't I promise you the payment I gave you? Didn't at the beginning of the day you agreed to work the whole day for 1 denarii, which was a day's payback, in Jesus's time? And like, well, yeah. So the owner hasn't been cheap with them. The owner has just been extravagant with others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's always interesting when that thing gets triggered, where when Jesus's grace is great for everybody but this community. It's always interesting because there's usually something behind that.
Right. Well, there's a little bit of pointing to that in the prodigal son story too, right? Once he comes back and returns to the father, how the other son then is jealous that he's given him his coat and put a ring on him and threw him a feast, and he's just like, wait, why all of a sudden is he getting to experience like almost his inheritance? And his father goes back to him being like, you've had this the whole time.
Bring Sephi in. No, bring Sephi in. The bus is here.
Seth is
the
arrived.
bus is here, and the leaf machine that I've not seen. So what you do in suburban Columbus is we have these things called leaves, and they fall off of trees, and you rake them to the curb, and then there's this big sucker thing, which is the technical term for it,
Perfect
that
for
sucks
podcasting.
up the leaves. What?
Is it perfect
Can
for
you hear
podcasting?
Can you hear it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll be
it's like
curious
this.
when you get your recording if I can hear it on your side, but yeah.
It's a huge rumble.
Yeah. I thought it was an airplane, like flying down your street.
Oh, that'd have been awesome.
That would have been awesome.
No, it's the leaf sucker thing, man.
Yeah.
All right, so we got Sethi here. Hold on a second. Sephi,
Dad,
come here, buddy.
where are you?
I'm right here, buddy.
Oh, God, Daddy.
We're doing the Vox show. You want to say hi to everybody?
Can hear.
Hi,
No,
Seth.
I know you can't hear them, but no one's talking. It's just us talking, okay?
Okay.
So, can you say,
Say,
may the Lord
where the Lord,
bless you
Matthew,
and keep you,
give you,
shine his face
your face
upon you,
upon you,
and give you peace.
get peace.
Amen.
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 How was your day?
Good.
Good day.
Yeah.
You want to say hi to everybody?
Hi.
Hi, people. He's waving. I love it.
And only I get to see it.
Hey, do you miss your friend Sunflower?
Yeah, fuck so.
Fox Show?
Yeah.
You miss Sunny?
Yeah.
Are we going to get married to her someday? Yeah, we've already negotiated. We're giving Andy 2 goats.
Yeah. The dowry is explicit.
The dowry.
So, I mean, that's where that's what's happening.
Well, there you go. There you go, sports fans. Seth Erie doing a little benediction for us today. Anything you want to close with, Andy Bear?
Nope. I think we're pretty good.
It's the questions are amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I just absolutely love them. So thank you guys so much for thinking through all this stuff with us. We're so privileged to be a part of your life. And so may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you. And in these days, oh my goodness, in these days, may he give us peace. Until next time, brothers and sisters, have a great week. Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast, and now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/voxpodcast.